Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Schrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome to you both. How you doing this week?
Doing well, Tanya. How about you?
Doing well. Just trying to stay out of the wind tunnel today.
It has been blustery.
It is blustery, and I am not a fan.
I know all you're doing right now is counting the seconds until kinetic.
I am indeed. I was getting ready to ask. I hope everybody has big plans for the glory this weekend.
Sunblock and bug spray, everybody. Sunblock.
Absolutely. And sensible shoes.
This wind keeps up, that water entry is going to be gnarly.
Oh my God.
Ooh. Not to mention Dead Man's Drop. There's nothing like getting sand in your eyes while you're trying to negotiate that hill. Well, we're gonna hope for the best. And in the meantime, Thad, would you like to tell us what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal on the cover?
Yeah, this week for the cover story, I dove into a neat story kind of developing down in Fortuna, where Fortuna High School received very unexpectedly a huge donation from a family trust. The school was notified a few years ago that Alice Eloise Gunnarsson, who graduated from Fortuna High in the 40s, I believe, when she was 16, and went on to serve in the Marine Corps and serve in the Marine Band. And had like a 30-year teaching career. She passed away in 2021, and her family trust named the Fortuna High School's music program as a beneficiary. And so they were notified and thought that they were going to get a donation somewhere in the six figures. And then I think it was just last year finally got the actual tally of what they were going to receive, and they received a $1.2 million donation. So just a gigantic donation for any music program, but especially a music program at a relatively small high school in Humboldt County. So this news came out about a year ago, and so I finally had the chance to kind of catch up with the district and music director Ian Campbell and talk to them just kind of about what their plans are for this money and how they hope it'll shape the program kind of long term. And as a part of that, one of the first things they did is they took $1 million of the money they've received and are putting it in a CD, a certificate of deposit at a local bank. And the idea there is they're just going to kind of keep rolling over that principal amount. And then every year they're going to kind of draw off the interest and use that to fund kind of purchases and enhancements, as Superintendent Clint Dewey called them, for the program. But the district has committed to keeping funding going for the program. So this money's not going to be used to pay music teachers salaries or to pay for facilities improvements or anything like that. They're really trying to protect this money and then use it just to really build up the program and make it kind of a top tier music program, which is really exciting. But so they took $200,000 off this initial sum that they received and immediately went to kind of making some improvements. And so some of that is just replacing old, outdated wind instruments and stuff, and then ordering all new uniforms for their marching band, which apparently they're still wearing the same uniforms they were wearing in the early 1990s. So there was well past time to get some new threads down there. But the really exciting thing is they purchased 2 instruments from Marimba One, which is a world-class marimba maker in Arcata that very rarely gets to make instruments that are going to stay local. So it was very exciting for the program, for the students who get to play what's really one of the best marimbas in the world, apparently, for folks who are into such things, and a vibraphone. But then it was also exciting for the folks at Marimba One who, like I said, just rarely get to make something that stays local and are very, very passionate about their craft, and were very excited when I went and visited them about sharing with high school students.
I just love this story that it ties in a local business with a local high school, and in a time when arts and music programs are struggling all through this country. I just think this is such a refreshing tale, and the family has all the gratitude for bringing that back to her local high school.
Yeah, it's a really cool story, and it's, talking to Ian Campbell from the music department down there. It sounds like it's just really come at a really fortuitous time too, and that the program is kind of building itself back up after some down years when its numbers were dwindling and whatnot. And so Fortuna Middle School brought back its music program 6 or 7 years ago, and so they're kind of starting to see that as a pipeline into the high school's music program. Ian has been there about 7 years, and they've started what's called the Fortuna Honor Band, which gets together the high school and the middle school, but then also middle school students from Rio Dell, Scotia, and Hydesville to perform a big 2-day event, annual event that they've been doing the last handful of years, that kind of keeps growing and getting bigger each year. And so, there's just a lot of excitement down there about kind of what the future of this music program might look like. Which was already had some momentum, and now looks like it's really going to have the funding to have, like top tier instruments and new uniforms, and might really kind of draw a new level of engagement, which is really exciting.
I have to say, I hope that there is I hope they make some sort of display or something so that everybody hears about this woman, because her life is a trip. Mm-hmm. Like I believe it was the first wave of women to join the Marines, right? I mean, and then she was an inventress. What?
Yeah.
She was building stuff in her garage and patenting and selling things, and she just sounds amazing. She sounds like an absolute trip, and I love her.
And apparently just like, tinkering around in her wood shop like well into her 80s. Sounds like an awesome person.
I can think of no better honor than that her legacy will live on in something that was so important to her and that shaped her whole life. And I can only imagine what it must have been like attending school, in the 30s in this county, and then going off and being the first woman to be a Marine. And it's very exciting. I love to hear stories of lives that were shaped here and where they went.
Yeah, and quite a life well lived. And then not much of it got into the story, but Marimba One is just a fascinating business in and of itself, and is a really, really cool local success story. And I had a great time visiting with Ron Samuels, who's the founder and owner of the company, and just him showing me around kind of their really, like I said, I keep saying it, but a world-class marimba shop. It was really neat.
Well, I encourage everybody to pick up this week's journal and read both the tale of Marimba One and the tale of Miss Gunderson, and a wonderful, gone but not forgotten Humboldt County resident.
Mm-hmm.
Well, turning to the news, you also have a wonderful story for us about what is going on in the sheriff's department.
Yeah, and so this was actually the Humboldt County Civil Grand Jury issued a report about a month ago now, calling for an oversight system for the sheriff's office. And it was as soon as the report came out, I was really interested in covering it. Unfortunately, there were some things that happened at Cal Poly Humboldt that you might have heard of that kind of demanded our attention for a while. But this week got to circle back to it, and the grand jury is recommending that the county implement a kind of 2-tiered oversight system for the sheriff's office, and really, saying that this has just become best practices. It was something that was recommended by the Obama's Commission on 21st Century Policing, that these be implemented, on a national scale or locally, but on a nationwide scale. And they're just kind of saying that it's far since time, that the police oversight is something that builds community trust. It results in, it's been shown to result in better policing in a lot of jurisdictions. And so they're calling on the county to implement this for the sheriff's office. And basically what it would be is, like I said, kind of two-pronged. The first is that there would be a citizens review board. And so this would be a board or commission of folks appointed by the Board of Supervisors who, meet with the sheriff on a monthly basis, talk about the issues in the office, weigh in on policy decisions, and things like that. And then also, we're kind of a fielding house for complaints. And so they both look over the sheriff's office's internal review process of complaints, but then also they're another avenue where citizens can bring, maybe citizens who don't feel comfortable registering a complaint directly with the sheriff's office could do it through their commissioner, and then it would be heard by the commission and addressed there. So that's kind of the first tier. And the second tier is what they call an office of the inspector general. And this would be somebody who, would have the power to subpoena documents and witnesses from the sheriff's office, would basically investigate complaints on its own. So not through the internal affairs process of the sheriff's office, but be an outside check and balance on those internal investigations, and then review kind of all critical incidents and then report to the oversight commission. And so the idea is that these two pieces would work together. It's not dissimilar to the model that the city of Eureka has imposed, although, with the sheriff being an elected official who's not hired by, a city manager or something like that, or answerable to the city council. It is a little bit different, but what Eureka has done is, they have an oversight board, and then they hired what they call an independent police auditor. And so this is a company that provides this service for a variety of different police departments in the state, and kind of does the same thing: reviews internal affairs investigations, reviews critical incidents, comes to both the public body, the oversight board, with recommendations and discussion points, but then also makes recommendations directly to the police department. So with this report, I was really curious to kind of catch up with Sheriff William Hansel and see how he felt about it.
And what was his response?
He was not super excited about it, plainly. He said that he's going to wait, and he has to respond in writing to the recommendation within 60 days. So he has about another month to do so. And said he really wanted to save some of his comments for there. But his big takeaway was that he just doesn't feel it's necessary. He took a little bit of a defensive posture and kind of saying, point to where there's a lack of trust, or point to where there's an issue that would necessitate this board, or that would warrant this board. Made some comments about, him feeling like he's an elected official, and so his oversight board is the public, who votes every 4 years whether to keep him in office. And kind of made some comments about not seeing other elected, calls for other elected officials to have oversight boards kind of looking over their shoulder. But there were some interesting things that he said he is amenable to, including kind of a discipline panel. And so there'd be like a board that would hear internal affairs cases at the sheriff's office and then make disciplinary decisions. So it wasn't just kind of the sheriff's office admin, and wasn't quite so insular. But I think, as we've seen, across the nation, for going back a long, long time, there's lots of issues with policing in America, and so I think these conversations, whether they result in the implementation of an oversight board or not, or there's just a lot of value in the conversation and us thinking about these kinds of things and how we want our law enforcement agencies to work, and how we want them to interface with the public.
Excellent point. Well, do you have any final thoughts about this article before we shift to Jennifer, and she's going to make us hungry, as usual?
I hope everybody checks it out, and then, it's certainly something that we'll continue reporting on when the sheriff, files an official response. We'll write about that too. I think the Board of Supervisors has to respond too, so we'll definitely keep writing about it.
Well, and hopefully in time he finds that this is a productive wave of the future, and hopefully he kind of comes to that place. That is my hope anyway. Well, Jennifer, would you like to tell us what's maybe not coming to the table, but what came to the grill this week?
Well, linguiça and plenty of it. I don't know how much folks have had in terms of variety of linguiça. There aren't that many brands available locally in the county to pick up. However, lots of people are making it at home. There you go. Now you know. Think about your neighbors. Is anyone holding out on you? Best to find out. So I went down to Ferndale last Friday, and as part of the 100 years of Festa celebration, the Portuguese Holy Ghost celebration that happens every year, this is the 100th year, they were blowing it up over the weekend, and it started, at least the public-facing part of it, started with a linguiça cook-off. Those 3 words everyone wants to hear. Linguiça cook-off, hyphenated. Anyway, so it was not a big cook-off, but it was the inaugural cook-off, and therefore special. So there were about exactly half a dozen competitors, and the teams were sort of loosey-goosey. The rules were at least vaguely applied. There seemed to be a little bit of confusion about whether the linguiça had to be homemade linguiça or whether it just had to be a linguiça recipe. But everybody really, I think, kind of came more or less to flex. Okay. If you make your own linguiça, I mean, you want to show it off, right? It's a whole big process. And lots of folks do it in groups. This is not like a solo activity where you're just like home alone making linguiça. Typically, from the folks that I spoke to, there might be a dozen or more people involved. Some people do it once a year. Some people get together monthly and do it. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friends, cousins, etc. And they get together with sometimes hundreds of pounds of meat and pork, because linguiça has to be pork. Lots of paprika, lots of garlic and onions and spices. I'm told bay leaf is extremely important. And they get together and make their own recipes. Sometimes they're family recipes handed down. Sometimes they're recipes that the group or an individual has tweaked over the years. And they make tons and tons of this stuff. Then it gets frozen, it gets divvied up, it gets vacuum sealed, etc. And you have to kind of know somebody who makes homemade linguiça, right? So again, goals for this year. And the cool thing was everybody sort of set up their grills, right? So you had about a half a dozen little grills and pots and cook stoves, and everybody was just like cutting up samples and sharing it with people who were visiting. So it basically had the feel of a big kind of family reunion at one point, because there were lots of, locals who were already part of this community, already taking part in the Holy Ghost Festival. But there were also people from outside coming to try things. There were some people who'd never had linguiça before. A woman came up to me and asked me, "Is this all going to be pork?" And I was like, "Yes, sweetie, it's all going to be pork." But there was some real variation between them, which was kind of the fun part for me. There were a pair of fellas up at the front. They would have been the first people that you'd seen come in. And that was the team of Griffith and Boyd. And Jim Boyd and Randy Griffith were out there. And not only, God love them, you know how like some people use cannabis and like they just want to use cannabis on their own. They just want to feel better, get high, whatever. And then there are people who want everybody to be high. That was these 2 dudes from your college dorm. You remember them. They were out here handing out jalapeno poppers and mushrooms stuffed with linguiça, trying to get everybody and their mother to eat some. If somebody said, "Oh, I already tried it," they're like, "Have another one." They were fantastic. Anyway,
the linguiça of love.
I know. They just wanted everybody to have that linguiça buzz, And then, there were a couple of folks who were using store-bought linguiça, but using sort of their traditional family way of cooking it. Pabst Blue Ribbon seems to be the common denominator, either boiling it in it or cooking it down into a kind of a molassesy syrup. There was some tension between a team. There were people who were for gas grill. There were people who were for coal grills. There were variations in grind. A very fine grind produces a very different tasting sausage and, of course, a different texture than a rough grind. And honestly, I think the rough grind, and the judges felt so also, the rough grind allows you to keep those little globules of fat that make a little burst and ruin your shirt when you bite into a piece of linguiça. Also, P.S., this was all done without bread. It was pure keto up in there. People just eating sausage. But I think that the flavor that, there were some people who go for Hungarian paprika, some people who specify it's got to be smoked paprika. Everybody kind of has their own take on it. And it was a pleasure to try a lot of them. There was one gentleman who showed up late, and he was cooking his homemade linguiça in butter. He just put down 2 Costco bricks of butter, like a shoebox of butter, into a pan and was cooking pork sausage in it. And I was just sort of looking up, waiting for lightning to hit him, but it didn't. It was incredible.
Did they set up cots for all the napping after this linguiça-thon?
There was one cop, and I was like trying to remember, like, wait, we are not doing rescue breathing anymore, right? Right? We skipped that now. It's just chest compressions. However, the judges, it was interesting. I spoke to the 3 judges who were chosen for no particular reason except their love of and appreciation of linguiça. One of them, Rich Salachi, Jeannie Fulton, and George Enos were the 3 judges. George Enos, who's an older gentleman, said to me that he's looking for gristle. He likes to get a little bristly bit when he's chewing on some linguiça. And texture seemed to be one of the main things that people were looking for. Salachi told me that he's looking for a lingering heat and like good fat, like little bits of fat, which I think, is important. But that wonderful orange color is really all about the paprika. And that is the thing that makes it so distinct from, say, an Italian sausage or another kind of sausage. And it was interesting to me that, at least in terms of, everybody that I asked, the folks who were cooking for the competition, everybody that I asked, they just eat linguiça pretty much with bread or kind of on its own, kind of just grilled, but more or less plain. It doesn't really go into so many recipes, at least that those folks were making. And that's quite different from necessarily how it's cooked in Portugal. It shows up in lots of dishes, lots of stews and things like that. But it's interesting because, to me anyway, because Ferndale is like a bubble in which Portuguese culture and Portuguese food have evolved on their own and become their own thing. One of the fellows that I talked to was actually someone I interviewed before regarding the alcatra, the soup that they make at the Portuguese Hall for big events. But his name is, it's Kevin Oliveira, and he was talking about the way that his family, grandparents, great-grandparents, further back used to make stuff. And he said they used to put the linguiça meat, the pork that they were going to grind, into a barrel with a bunch of wine and a bunch of spices and pickle juice and throw in a potato. And when the potato rose to the top, then it was ready to grind, which is a completely different process than how most people make it now. But it's really interesting to see how it's evolved and how each family's recipe, each sort of group's recipe has evolved.
Well, Jennifer, that's all fascinating. I'm so glad you were able to attend and report back to us. I encourage everybody to get this week and every week's edition of the North Coast Journal and read the entire article for themselves. It sounds like it was a blast. Well, that wraps up our time for this week. It went by so fast. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now, or of course you can find it online at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us and staying informed and supportive of our North Coast community. Go see the kinetic race for the glory.